Women podcast. We believe that in constant change and growth that we find fulfillment, not in perfection. Perfection is like a closed door, whereas striving to be better is always an open door. Our purpose is to enhance the best of women every day by empowering yourself to create your own success stories. Empowerment comes through self-knowledge, accompanied by soft skills development and professional knowledge. Finally, a podcast for women that seeks to act intelligently and sustainably in all aspects of your life. As a mother, professional, a daughter, friend, spouse, and in your interactions with your community. May your life be an open door to many possibilities. We will inspire you to pursue the changes you need to achieve 5 stars in all aspects of your life. And now, your trusted advisor, Bettina Meyer-Flug.
Hello, my friends. I'm here with two special people that I met at the Small Business Development Center, Suzanne and Bill. They made an amazing presentation 2 weeks ago explaining how to make your business be ready to be sold. And I think this subject is so interesting because if you're a small entrepreneur and you want in the future to sell your business, it's very important for you to prepare you right now. And they can be the best advisors for you on this field. Suzanne, can you tell me a little bit about your background in this business area?
Yes, thanks, Bettina. I didn't realize it, but my father was a serial entrepreneur, and he owned about 20 different businesses. And I got a dinner table education and just knew and loved small business and what people can do with the variables of time, money, energy, ideas, and people. And here we are. Got into a different career and realized it wasn't for me. And I love doing what I do and helping people make big changes and impacts in their lives.
Thank you. And we have here together as well Bill. Bill helps her in the business. Bill, can you tell a little bit about your background?
Like many brokers, I started out owning businesses. I've had 30 years of experience starting, sometimes failing, often succeeding, and then selling a few of these businesses. Suzanne sold one of those for me about 5 years ago, and just not knowing what I wanted to do and not being ready to retire, I jumped into this field and absolutely love it. So I focus my time on engineering, construction, services related businesses, the type of businesses that I've owned and have a real good feel for.
Thank you. So I'd like to welcome you both for being here with us in our podcast today. And my first question to you is how people value business.
People like businesses that make money, of course. But what you do is you look at first the elements of the business sale. How much equipment do they have? How much inventory? But what people really want is an income stream, and an income stream that can transfer to the buyer. So it's really simple and complex at the same time. It's the price somebody will pay for a business is equal to the earnings of that business times a multiple, and the multiple it quantifies the risk, the likelihood of future income for the new owner, and the replicability of income for the owner. Most small businesses, you take what you can earn in a year and you multiply it times something between 1 and 4 is the typical range. Bill, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, there's really two different types of people. There are creators, people that just start businesses, they're entrepreneurial, and most of those are doing it because they have a passion about the business. Most buyers, on the other hand, are not that creative. They don't want to create or start something on their own. As Suzanne said, they're looking to buy something that's already up and running. Probably one of the biggest conflicts we run into is sellers that believe their business is very unique and someone's going to love it, and it shouldn't matter about the value, the revenue that it's generating. The buyers just don't fall into that category very often. They want to see money coming through. They're willing to buy a business that's maybe a startup or early on in the stage of development, and they're going to take it to a new level, but they still want to see the financials. So they're buying a stream of money and an opportunity to put their background to use.
I'd like to add one other buyer group, which, relating to your introduction, Bettina, and it's sometimes for business owners, the best way to grow your business is to buy another business and add it on. You can get new customers, you can get new products, you can get new geographies that you service. So that can be really attractive and way to grow a lot faster.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have a friend that lives in the area here in Colorado, and they just bought an inspection company. And I know how important it was, the transitioning period where the owner was helping and guiding them. How long do you think it's the ideal time for the transition once you buy a business and you have to give your support for the new buyers?
I'll say it depends on the business and the person buying the business. I have seen transitions take a year, and I've seen transitions take an hour. Most fall in between. It depends.
Everything depends on the business.
And the person, how much they know, because you could have two different buyers with totally different backgrounds. One might have worked in the industry. Everybody needs to be familiarized with the systems and operations of the business and the employees and the customers and vendors. But then it goes from there on how long you need to stick around. And some businesses, we were talking about seasonal businesses, Bettina. I've had businesses that different things happen, like a landscape company. Different things happen in the spring than in the fall. And so the seller might have to come back 6 months later and show the buyer the wrap up for the season.
A critical question that we ask the seller when we're interviewing them and putting their business together, a report on their business, is can you leave the business for an extended period of time? Can you take a 3-week, 4-week vacation? Or can you be gone for a year? And it really depends on their staff, right? And their processes. So if they don't have people in place that know how to do everything they can do, well, that's the same question that the buyer is going to ask. How long does the seller need to stay here to train me all of these things? And as Suzanne alluded to, most businesses have seasons. So even though the owner might be able to train the buyer maybe in a few weeks on how to do something, the next season rolls around and there's, where do we keep the keys to the snowplow? Questions that only are in the owner or the seller's head. So most of that depends on the staff. If you have a staff that can pretty much cover all the roles of the current owner, well, then the person can exit pretty soon. Otherwise, they may have to stay up to a year to really transfer that knowledge.
One of the best ways to add value to your business is to take a year vacation and have the business run well. But what happens there is you have to put systems in place, and what it does for the buyer is it reduces the risk because there's people and systems, and so they don't need the owner. But if everything is in the owner's head and nothing can be done without the owner's involvement, that makes them have to stay longer, and it also decreases the business value in the buyer's mind because they wonder if they can take over and do the same.
And interesting enough, I've had some people, while we're not consultants, we don't come in and consult with your business for years at a time to improve its processes. Our job is really to get it sold. But I have had people ask me, what can I do to increase the value of my business? They're looking at selling because maybe they're stressed out or they're tired or they're overwhelmed. And when we give them this advice, I've had a few people within 6 or 12 months call me back and say, I did what you're saying and now I'm enjoying the business and I don't want to sell it. So they put into place these tools to make it more valuable, but it also made it more valuable to them and it gave them more freedom. So as we always say, start and run a business as if you're going to sell it, and maybe you'll end up liking it more.
But the truth is everybody exits eventually. Nobody stays forever. So you still, even if you're enjoying it, usually if you're enjoying it, you're making more money. That's great. But someday you'll come back to us.
Yeah. And I think a very important question often is, why does somebody want to sell a business? It is the number one question that the buyers will, when they finally meet the seller, even though they've heard it from us or if they've seen it written in a report, they'll look square in the eyes of the seller and ask, why are you selling? And there's lots of reasons. I'm aging out, I'm ready to retire, maybe an illness. Sometimes people just get bored and tired, and they're creators and they built something, but they don't want to manage it, right? I always tell people, just be as honest as you possibly can. Don't try to hide anything. The reason for you to exit may be the exact reason for somebody else to jump in. If you're stressed because you can't create processes, and a person buying the business likes what you've created, and that's their skill, is building these processes or taking it to the next level, they're going to find that business more appealing. So knowing when to exit or why to exit is important. Sadly, we get quite a few phone calls from people that say, I just got this doctor's report and I've got 6 months to exit. And we treat a business like that sometimes differently than the person that says, I can stay for 2 years, help me build it, we'll sell it for top dollar. I'm not in a great rush.
I got it. And what are the steps to sell a business? Can you explain the process very clear?
Well, again, the process somewhat depends on the business itself. There's some general steps that we take. Usually the first one is a valuation. We take a serious look at the entire business to determine what its marketable price is. And it's usually a range. A low price might get a business sold sooner. A higher price may take a while. The next step is for the seller to determine if that's going to work for them. They have to buy in. And if they don't like the price, and they may have to keep it for a while to build it up, that's what happens. But if they make the commitment that they're willing to invest the time and energy to sell a business, because it does take more energy from the seller, you're running your business on a daily basis, but you're also working with us and interviewing buyers and putting together documents for the sale. So it's not without effort. Then we go to work and start determining who the potential buyers are, what the pool of prospective strategic or financial buyers might be for that business. We generally write a summary, a prospectus, we call it a CBR, or a confidential business review. We'll put all of our thoughts down about this business, including how to market it. Now, we have 30 some years of experience with buyers contacting us on a regular basis. So we have a pretty good pool of known buyers already, and we reach out to that, but we also advertise in multiple places. We've got upwards of a dozen or so website portals that certain brokers will look for, just like the MLS on real estate. We have portals where people will come looking for businesses, or we buy databases. I recently sold a business and I purchased a database of the general managers of stores like this across the US, and did a mailing to those people to see if anybody wanted to maybe go into ownership of the same type of business that they've been managing for years. That obviously doesn't work with every type of business. So we take into account the type of business, the size of business, the location, and then we may go to market. We are always conscious of the confidentiality that the seller wants to maintain. If you have a unique business and maybe you're the only company in Fort Collins that does one thing, we're not going to put it out there as a Fort Collins business doing X, because anybody could figure out who it is. But if you are a pizza parlor in Denver, there must be 1,000, right? So if we said Denver-based pizza parlor, we're not giving away your identity. So we have to be pretty careful in that respect. Then we advertise and bring in the buyers. Finding the buyer is probably 20% of the effort of selling a business. It's the most important. If you don't have the buyer, you're not going to get to the next step. But there is a vetting process or an interview process that we go through. We generally meet with, upwards of 50, sometimes 100 potential buyers. I generally, for every 5 to 10 people that I interview to buy a business, only one of those is somewhat qualified. Either they like the business, it's the right price, they have the financial background and skill set to run the business. But then they have to look at the business itself and determine if they like it. And if they do, the next step is generally an interview with the seller. So the seller and buyer will meet quite a few times to determine if the culture, if the business is a fit. If the seller and the buyer don't get along, it generally isn't going to be a good purchase. It's not like buying a house where you don't really need to know who the owner was. When you're buying a business, you're buying the personality of the seller, either through the employees or the customers or the type of business. So that interview process is quite critical. And if it goes well and they like the business, the next step then would be to make an offer. Again, they might go back and do some more analysis on the financials or market research, or they'll make an offer pending some of that research, a letter of intent or a letter of interest, get them in the same ballpark, area that they agree on the general basic structure of the business. And if that happens well, then they go into due diligence and purchase agreement creation. Due diligence is a deep evaluation of the business. Nobody really wants to go into that level of analysis unless they have at least a handshake agreement that this buyer is willing to pay what the seller is willing to accept. We often call that an exclusive period because for a month or so, they're both doing a lot of work. They don't want to interview other buyers. Often a business is sold where there may be multiple buyers all competing for the business at the same time. In very small businesses that we often sell, let's say under a few $1,000,000, that's not the case. It's one buyer, one seller. Due diligence goes quickly. The contracts can go quickly. We have to often go out and find financing, SBA or otherwise, or some structured purchase. All of these elements need to come together in then what we call the closing, where the business actually changes hands and the financing occurs. After the closing becomes that training period that you were talking about. How long do you stay? Months to a year or even longer. So that's the general process. Suzanne, was there anything in there that you would add?
Yeah, one of the things I think that's important, most of us have experience buying homes, and it's almost every home, the buyer gets a loan. And with that loan, they can buy any home that's in that price range. With businesses, it's very different. The first thing is on the seller's end. The seller's financials determine if the Small Business Administration, SBA, which is the group that finances most business sales, if they will even consider it. So you've got to have clean books and records. You can't write off getting your dog groomed and everything else, or they won't lend on it. They will only lend on profitable businesses that show that there is the ability to repay the loan. And since a business is how most people earn their living, it also has to pay the living expenses of the family. And then the buyer has to qualify as well. You don't go and just get qualified to buy any business. If you're an engineer and you've never owned and worked in a restaurant, you're not going to be able to get a loan for a restaurant. You'll be able to get a loan for an engineering company. So it's very different. And I don't know, Bill, what percentage of the businesses do you think that we see actually do qualify for a loan? The ones we take generally do, but the ones we look at, I'd say 60–70% won't qualify for a loan.
Yeah, that's true. As a matter of fact, that goes towards the value of the business. If you can't borrow money to buy that business, it is not worth as much as a business producing the same amount of revenue or profits that is financeable.
I know you and Bettina a conversation about people that don't show all the money their business makes or try to reduce their taxes.
Yeah, that was my next question. If your business has any unreported income, how will this impact the sale of the company?
Poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Poorly. You think you're saving money, but you're not. Let's say you pocket $30,000 a year, you might save $10,000 in taxes, but what you do is reduce the financeability of your business maybe by a factor of 3 So you lose $90,000 of financing, and as you shrink that pool, that ability to repay, the business becomes less desirable. A business needs to pay for somebody to be able to live on it. It needs to be able to pay for debt service, and it's an investment. And in every investment, you have a perceived level of risk and expected rate of return. And so you start taking away money from that pot, and pretty soon you have a business that isn't as desirable and can't be financed. So you get to be the bank.
Yeah, sadly, too many business owners think that their number one goal is to avoid paying taxes. And they'll find certain investments. Let's take a construction company where they could buy a $20,000 truck to do the job, but they say, I'm going to go buy a $50,000 truck because then I get a bigger depreciation and I'm not paying taxes and it looks nicer. Well, you've just taken $30,000 worth of profit that year out of that business. And you've now made it very heavily equipment valued and not profit valued. So saving taxes by spending more money that's deducted is a short-term solution.
Yeah, buyers like businesses.
Yeah, I have a client, coaching client who was analyzing a landscaping company to buy, and this company didn't have any contract with the clients. How this can impact a business if you don't have good contract with your customers?
A buyer is looking for the consistency of income. Having contracts with clients, customers that pay on a regular basis or guaranteed to pay at some point, it decreases the risk and therefore it increases the value of the business. I've had many old school customers, 60, 70-year-old clients or sellers that just don't have contracts with their customers. They did everything by a handshake. One in particular that I met with, when I reviewed his business, I said, you really need to have these contracts. He didn't even own didn't even have a contract. So we had to go through the process of showing him how to write a proposal, get a contract, get a regular stream of income from his customers. He did that and he went out and got 2- and 3-year contracts. He was a property maintenance company. We were able to sell that business in very short order because he had these locked in long-term contracts.
As I recall, your initial opinion of value changed after he got the contracts. And was it double or triple that you got him over your initial?
Yeah, over a course of about almost 3 years, when I first met him, his value was probably in the $300,000 range. And we met every 6 months and he just kept deploying these solutions that I was giving him, like the signed contracts and a few other items. We sold the business 3 years later for just over $1 million. He was extremely happy. After about 1.5 years, he was one of those people that said, I'm starting to enjoy my business. I've hired people to do the things that I was not wanting to do before in an effort to make it sellable. And now he was only working 30 hours a week and really enjoying himself. Sadly, though, he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, so he had to sell the business. And we were able to sell it in, I think it was like 3.5, 4 months. But he had the luxury of 2 years of putting together a plan to improve the quality or sellability of his business. And he just executed all those suggestions that I gave him.
That's great. And if you own the property your business is on, how can this affect the sale?
Well, as we have all seen, the value of real estate has gone up quite a bit recently. So it's great to own the real estate, and there's a security there, and the bankers and the buyers love it if they can get it. So what a seller needs to do is make sure that their business is paying the fair market rent of that building. If the building was worth $500,000 10 years ago and it's worth $1.5 million now, and they're paying a rent based on the $500,000, the buyer is going to have to pay it based on $1.5 million. So they're going to have the expenses of that extra $1 million of loan, which is going to take away from the business value. We're going to have to do what's called normalizing it. And so let's say that's $100,000 a year to support that extra $1 million of value. We're going to have to subtract $100,000 from the earnings of the business. However, the seller has to realize that they're getting that extra $1 million just in a different place from the business. So they might get actually less for the business, but $1 million more for the real estate. And it's the combined package. And, you know, on the other hand, if they don't want to sell the real estate and the business wants to stay there, it's a very nice income stream for a seller, retirement income stream.
And how about the owner's salary? Does it impact the deal as well? It's important to make any adjustments.
You know, there are many different legal entities and they all take money out of the business differently. And so what we do is we look at all the money a business is making, and then we try to figure out what is a fair salary for that job. The business may or may not be paying that. And so we make an adjustment on it, because if the buyer needs to come in, if it's $100,000 and the owner's only been taking 50, the business is going to have to support another 100,000. And then what's left will be what they can get a loan on and pay for the business, the return on the business on.
Okay, we hear a lot about the gray areas for buyers. What does that mean? And is there a ideal percentage of gray area in a selling negotiation? Can you explain for us?
I think what you're referring to was in the show, that the people that like to reduce the earnings of their business so that they don't have to pay taxes on it. So we've seen everything. We've seen, you know, as I referred to before, getting the dog groomed somehow gets run through the business expenses. We have a business for sale right now. About 80% of what the owner says are, we don't like to see more than 10% of the total cash flow. If you've got too much, it makes it so you can't get financing on the business. And so you yourself get to be the bank again. And most sellers don't want that. Most, you know, in real estate, people are used to thinking, I'm getting all my money out at the closing day. That may or may not be true in a business, depending upon how you run it, if financing is available, and if the buyer can continue in the same vein that you have been.
And you mentioned a lot during the presentation. I saw that it's very important to have the books right. So how do you normalize expenses and structure all the numbers to sell your company?
The first thing to do is, it is so important to have good books and records in the format that buyers expect, which means going to a good business CPA. And it is worth all the money to make that investment. And that means no unreported cash. It means doing it according to accepted accounting principles, and that will provide value for your business. Not having that is the opposite. I was working with a company a couple of years ago, and the guy that owned it lived in Mexico, so he had a manager. So we get the financials in October and the business looks very good. And then in December, the business sales went down and profits went down. And I'm like, how can your sales and profits go down the last 2 months? His manager was actually, if he quoted a job, he put it in the books as a sale, and then he took it out at the end of the year. That just killed the sale of that business. And there's so many things that people can do, but you've got to have proper accounting.
I got it. And staff is also important. You mentioned, Bill, it will be ideal if the owner could travel for a year and their business will be run by the staff. How good staff can impact the business? And how important is, some people put relatives as their staff. How does it impact in a selling?
Right, it's critically important. If you have a business that's dependent on employees, and we often get people that come to us with businesses or just one-person operations. That's obviously a little harder to sell, because if something happens to the seller, you really have nothing. But so the question becomes, you've got a staff, are they cross-trained? Are you too dependent on one or two people? And if they left, the business would be in a hurt. So there needs to be a staff, an organization chart that really can survive a few people leaving the business, especially the seller or the owner exiting the business, and then a place for the buyer to come in and be able to understand all these roles of these different people. Years ago, I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, we could sell a service company that was short-staffed but had customers, because finding employees when the unemployment rate was, let's say, over 9-10%, was not that complicated, was not that hard. In the last year or so, buyers realize that staff is probably more important than customers. They can find customers. What they could not find or hire is more staff. So an understaffed company is less valuable today than it was just a few years ago. Many sellers come to us and say that the reason they want to sell is they can't keep up with the demand. They cannot hire people. Let's say plumbing companies as an example, there's not a lot of young kids coming into the industry. So it's becoming a very difficult industry to staff for. So the older owners, again, the pushing retirement age, they can't fight that battle anymore. They're having a hard time finding new employees. Some of them are working 50, 60 hours themselves because they're working in the business. They're actually doing the hands-on work because they can't find people. So somebody buying that business, a critical question to them is, can the staff produce the volume that you've done in the past? Can we sustain our revenues, or do I have to hire? And if they have to hire people, again, it hurts the value of the business.
Yeah, pre-COVID, there was an acute shortage of employees out there, and people couldn't staff the business. We'll see what happens post-COVID, but you also referenced family members in the business, Bettina, and last year, about this time, we had a business that 4 of the family members were in critical roles in the company, and that played back to how long they had to stay. They had to stay 6 months and train new people to take over those jobs gradually while they exited out, because 4 people, the brain trust leaving all at once is way too big a hit for most businesses to take.
Yes, I got it. And there is a concept on managing companies. It's called long tail, like spreading your risk when you talk about customers, not depending on a certain number of customers. What is your impression about it? How large your customer database does impact your business selling?
Yes, very much so. We call it customer distribution. A business that only has, let's say, a handful of clients, 4 or 5, and if any of those customers leave, they could drop 20, 30, 40% of their volume overnight, versus a company that the largest customer might only be 1 or 2% of their revenue. You'd have to lose quite a few customers to lose 10% of your revenue if the largest customer is only 1%. So a bigger distribution is better than a small concentration.
Yeah, the buyer looks at what is the risk in me buying this business. And if you've got 1 customer, which I sold a business a few years back that had only 1 customer, there's risk. And so what it means is an adjusted payout structure. Usually the buyer will want to pay, if they keep that customer 1 year, they'll pay this, 2 years this, 3 years this. And what we did on top of that was create an incentive that if the buyer expanded the customer base, which made the business less risky, there was a benefit there as well in our deal structure. But people don't want to buy a business with only 1 customer. And that business had that customer for 30 years, and it made a lot of money.
Oh my God. Yeah. So you guys have experience in all areas, all size of organizations. It's incredible.
It's fun, yeah. You learn a lot for companies.
We hold the position there's no 2 customers, no 2 businesses exactly the same. I mean, you might have 2 plumbing companies that are generating the exact same gross revenue, and when you look at their books, they're totally different. When you look at the way they staff, totally different. The risk elements are different for each business. So even within a specific industry, businesses are quite different.
Everyone's unique.
And now with all this COVID happening, do you think there are more loans or less loans available for people who wants to buy businesses?
Right now, there's a fantastic government program in place. Unfortunately, if you're not in line already, you're too late. It only goes till September 27th, but it's really incentivizing the people to get loans on businesses. They are stricter. The business has to prove it survived COVID. So some of the businesses that are restricted and, you can only have 25 or 50% occupancy, those might not be saleable, but there are buyers out there. There are a lot of people who have, this has made them want to change their lives. There are people that have lost jobs that need to find work and want to buy businesses. So the market is strong. Financing is available for the right businesses. And then there are some very motivated sellers. So there are some great opportunities as well. And this is a great time for somebody to grow their business by taking on another one and adding to it and being stronger.
It's all about risk for the lenders. I had a lender that probably did 50% of the deals that I did last year, and they were all construction related again. And I brought him a really nice package right around Christmas time. And he said, I can't even take that. I'm overwhelmed. My portfolio is too heavy in construction. He said, why don't you bring me some restaurants or retail, which is something I don't touch. The irony is we just closed on another business last month, and I reminded him of that statement. And he said, yes, I wish I would have taken all of your construction businesses during or before the COVID hit, because the restaurants and retail that he took were hurting, right? So he was trying to balance out his portfolio. He didn't know COVID was coming. Nobody did. But lenders are very conservative people. You know, they measure risk on a daily basis, right? So COVID has created a lot of uncertainty. Even if a business is doing well, they don't know if it's going to survive or continue doing well. If a business is hurting, they don't know if it's going to bounce back or stay where it is. So everything's looked at with much more seriousness now than it was 8-9 months ago. In addition to that, the banks are overwhelmed providing these PPP, you know, the Paycheck Protection Act, or other loans to their existing clients. So they don't really have time to look at new loans for new businesses. So we have a shortage of lenders that are available, and they're looking at businesses with much more scrutiny than they had in the past. So lending is a difficult situation. It's not impossible. We've had quite a few closings in the last few months. I have at least one a month coming up. The banks just took a little longer to decide if they wanted that business or not.
And how does your consulting company work? So you have a partnership with a small business development center. How do you normally charge your services? Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, one of our great partners is the Larimer County Small Business Development Center, and that's how we got connected. And they're a great resource for people, both sides of the table, buyers, sellers, and they have a whole program of courses to help you and workshops to help you through each of the different business issues you might have. And we're one of their consultants. Bill is a consultant. He helps people put value on businesses or solve business sale related problems. Most of that is done kind of complimentary. We're talking about a small fee if people just come from the outside and want a value, just because it's so time intensive. And then if you listed with us, we go through quite a bit of work before we decide we'd mutually agree we'll enter into a relationship. We usually do give you our opinion of the value of your business. And then if, you know, it's the right business for us and we're the right people for you, then we enter into a relationship. We ask for a small upfront fee just because we can put hundreds of hours in selling your business just to make sure you're serious. And then we make most of our money, just like realtors do, as a success fee. Except that business sales tend to have a higher commission rate than home sales.
Yeah, I don't know how other brokers work, but I generally meet with as many as 20 or 30 people before I have a certain client. So a lot of that work is just long-term assistance. I never mind meeting with somebody that might be years away from, you know, that transition point. If I can give them a little clear direction now, like this person I told you about with that property maintenance company, you know, it took 2.5, 3 years for him to make a decision to sell his business, but we improved it all the way through. So we do quite a bit of this complementary consulting that Suzanne was mentioning. Through the SBDC, we started a program recently for a small fee, and that money goes to the SBDC to help them, with their services. But this program recently is just a cursory valuation. If somebody just doesn't have any idea what they're worth, sometimes getting a fair market value is a good starting point, and that can determine if they need to, pour time and energy into building the business up to be more valuable, or maybe surprisingly, it's worth what they need to retire and they're willing to sell it. So we've partnered with the SBDC to provide that short valuation process.
And it's good to know what your business is worth in your whole, wealth portfolio. Plus, there are things you can do to make your business worth so much more. And so we kind of guide you that way. But the time to start working on the sale of your business and positioning it for it is the day you open it. And we're never, we always are happy to talk to you about what you can do. I'm thinking of a woman who we've been working with her through over 3 years now. She didn't like the number in the beginning. It turned out she had a kind of service business, but she was in a retail space, and she was in a huge retail space. So she had to keep retail hours. And we suggested she move the business to a more industrial warehouse kind of space. She did that. She cut her rent by 2/3. She found she didn't have to staff the business as much. She tripled the value of her business as well by making these changes to it, and had a better life. And she does want to sell it, but in this case, there's just sometimes simple things you can do that when you're looking at it yourself, you don't see, and other people like ourselves do see it.
And it's interesting, though, we represent the sellers typically in our brokerage model. But for every seller that we work with, we probably work with 30, 40 buyers to a great level. And sometimes as much time spent with the buyer as we do with the seller. So I find myself consulting with buyers on a regular basis, just trying to figure out what they want to do. They don't know. Often they'll call you and say, well, I'll take a pizza parlor or a roofing company or software development right? So we spend quite a bit of time trying to really find out what the buyer really wants to do. Most buyers shop for, I don't know what the industry average is. I would say probably at least 2 or 3 years from the time they start until they find the business. When they first got started, they didn't understand the process. When we meet somebody that's been at this for a couple of years, they know how to analyze the books. They know how to analyze the business better. Sadly, many buyers never buy something. They're just not entrepreneurial. They shop forever, kicking tires, but never buying. And that just happens. And on a rare occasion, I've had phone calls from people that said, this is the first business I've looked at. I need to go shopping. And they come right back within a few days and they say, I just love it. It's the perfect business. When it's right, it's right. It's no different than dating or anything else that we do in life where we have to make decisions. Sometimes the first one is the right one. Sometimes they're not.
And if somebody that is listening to us wants to discuss a unique situation, how can they get in touch with you guys?
www.frontrangebusiness.com, and you'll find the links to Bill and myself and our phone numbers there.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Bill. It was amazing talking with you. I love your webinar over there, and I hope these tips will help a lot of our listeners. And if you have your unique situation, please don't hesitate to contact them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bettina.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom Women Podcast. To hear past and future episodes, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast channel. We appreciate your reviews and suggestions for future show topics. If you have a question or a suggestion, please write to us at podcast@wity.tech. More resources are available for you at our website, wity.tech. And please join us in the Wisdom for Nonprofits group on LinkedIn. Wisdom Woman is copyright 2020 by Bettina Mayer Flug. and WITY.tech, all rights reserved.